Welcome to the Dread Journal. I am Ulrich Mossberg, and I shall be your guide through some of the most horrifying true stories sent to us. These stories are not urban legends, myths, or tall tales. They are true testimonials sent to us by those who have worked on oil rigs. These are tales sent by those who feel they must hide their identities, either due to the question of their sanities or hiding from corporate authorities, but still want to be heard. Oil rigs are some of the most desolate places on our planet. They are surrounded by deep, dark waters, and the terrors they hide are reflected in these stories. Now, let us look into some of these tales and see what will forever be added into the Dread Journal. My name is Tommy, and I worked as a communications operator on offshore drilling platforms in the Gulf of Mexico for 9 years. During that time, I maintained radio contact for crews ranging from 80 to 200 workers, coordinated emergency communications during hurricanes and equipment failures, and logged thousands of hours of routine chatter that keeps offshore operations running safely. But nothing, in my experience, ever prepared me for what happened aboard the semi-submersible platform Gulf Horizon during the winter of 2018. On offshore rigs, radios are the absolute heartbeat of survival. Every floor, every worker, every shift operates through constant communication networks that connect drill crews to supervisors, engine room personnel to deckhands, and the entire platform to supply boats, helicopters, and onshore coordination centers. Lose contact for even a few minutes, and you lose situational awareness that can mean the difference between life and death in an emergency. But what happens when entire sections of a rig fall into complete radio silence? When communication systems go dark for hours at a time, only to return with digital logs showing conversations between operators who weren't even on the platform. It sounds crazy, I know. It almost sounds like a fantasy. But if I don't say this now, then I will never find peace. And so I have to tell you about the communication black holes that drove me away from offshore work and still haunt my dreams. Gulf Horizon was a massive semi-submersible drilling platform positioned 160 miles south of Mobile, Alabama, operating in 4,800 feet of water above a promising natural gas formation. The platform housed 147 workers and represented the latest in offshore drilling technology, with redundant communication systems designed to maintain contact even during the worst Gulf storms. My station was in the central communications room, a windowless space filled with banks of radios, satellite equipment, and digital recording systems that captured every transmission for safety and regulatory compliance. The room operated around the clock, with operators like me monitoring 16 different radio channels simultaneously while maintaining logs of all communication traffic. The communication system was designed with multiple backup layers. Primary VHF radios handled routine traffic between work areas. UHF systems managed emergency communications. Satellite phones provided contact with onshore operations, and digital recording equipment captured everything for later analysis. No single point of failure could completely disrupt communications, or so we believed. My supervisor was Rita, a former Coast Guard communication specialist who ran the radio room with military precision. Rita had coordinated communications during Hurricane Katrina, the Deepwater Horizon disaster, and dozens of smaller emergencies that had tested Gulf platforms over the years. Communications keep this platform alive, she told new operators during their first week of orientation. Every worker's life depends on our ability to coordinate responses, relay information, and maintain contact with the outside world. We are the nervous system of this operation, she said, with a voice that I could only describe as both authoritative and yet absolutely gorgeous. The communication protocols were strictly enforced. Every work area checked in hourly during routine operations. Emergency channels remained continuously monitored, and all traffic was logged with timestamps and operator identification codes. Missing a scheduled check-in triggered immediate investigation, and communication equipment failures activated automatic backup systems within seconds. It was during a routine night shift in November that I first encountered the phenomenon that would change my understanding of how communication systems could function, and also my understanding of the nature of reality itself. I was monitoring normal evening traffic, shift handovers between day and night crews, routine equipment status reports, casual conversation between workers in different areas of the platform. Communication was typical for a Thursday night, steady, predictable, professionally managed. That's when things started going downhill. At exactly 11:47 p.m., radio contact with the North Wing living quarters went completely silent. Not static, not interference, not equipment failure sounds. Absolute silence. The cliche says that silence is deafening, but this was the first time I felt I truly understood that. The channel that had been carrying routine chatter between workers in the residential area simply went dead, as if someone had switched off every radio in that section of the platform at the same time. I immediately implemented communication failure protocols, attempting contact on backup channels, testing equipment connections, and notifying Rita of the communication loss. Standard procedure required immediate investigation of any communication blackout that lasted longer than 5 minutes. These were the first warning signs of fire, gas, leaks, or other emergencies that prevented workers from responding to radio calls. 10 minutes later, contact with the North Wing resumed as suddenly as it had disappeared. Workers in that area responded normally to radio checks, reporting routine activities, and expressing confusion when I asked if they had experienced any communication problems. "We've been talking the whole time," insisted Jake, the night shift supervisor for the North Wing residential area. "Radio's been working fine, just the usual chatter between the guys." But when I reviewed the digital recording system, the evidence contradicted every report from the workers. The recorders showed that during the 10-minute communication blackout, radio traffic from the North Wing had continued uninterrupted. 30 minutes of clear conversations between two operators who didn't exist on our crew roster. One voice identified themselves as Hall, using radio call sign NH7 that wasn't assigned to any current worker. The other called himself Denton, with call sign NH12 that hadn't been used since our radio system was upgraded 2 years earlier. Both voices were calm, professional, and completely familiar with our platform's operations and procedures. Their recorded conversation covered routine topics: valve pressure checks in the North Wing mechanical rooms, safety drill schedules for the following week, complaints about the quality of coffee in the galley, and speculation about weather conditions for the upcoming shift change. Exactly the kind of professional chatter that occurred between experienced offshore workers during night shifts. But there were no men named Hall or Denton on our crew. According to personnel records, no workers with those names had ever been assigned to Gulf Horizon. The radio call signs they were using hadn't been active for years, and the specific work assignments they discussed didn't match any current operations. When I reported the recording anomaly to Rita, she initially assumed we were picking up radio traffic from another vessel or platform. Cross interference occasionally occurred when atmospheric conditions caused radio signals to travel further than normal, allowing operators to overhear conversations from distant installations. But Rita's investigation revealed that no other platforms were operating close enough to create interference. No supply boats were in our area during the blackout period, and no aircraft had been transiting in our airspace. The phantom conversations were originating from our own communication system, recorded by equipment that showed no signs of malfunction or external interference. Over the next few weeks, the communication blackouts became a regular occurrence, first only affecting the north wing, then spreading to other areas of the platform in an apparently random pattern. The drill floor would go silent for 20 minutes, followed by resumption of normal communications and digital logs showing conversations that shouldn't have existed. Engine room communications would disappear for an hour, then return with recordings of detailed technical discussions between the two men, Hall and Denton, that I came to call the Phantom Operators. Each blackout followed the same impossible pattern: absolute silence on active radio channels, while workers in the affected areas insisted they had maintained normal communications throughout the period. Meanwhile, our digital recording systems captured extensive conversations between non-existent operators, demonstrated intimate knowledge of our platform's operations, procedures, and personnel. The Phantom operators discussed equipment failures that hadn't occurred, maintenance schedules that weren't planned, and safety drills that weren't scheduled. Their conversations included specific details about platform operations that only experienced offshore workers would know, using correct terminology and following proper radio protocols. One recorded conversation was the worst. During a blackout affecting the drill floor, the Phantom operators discussed a major equipment failure. Drill floor compromised, primary BOP actuator showing hydraulic pressure loss, initiating emergency shutdown sequence, all personnel clear the drill floor immediately. The recorded emergency continued for 47 minutes, with Phantom voices coordinating evacuation procedures, reporting equipment status, and managing crisis response according to standard platform protocols. Emergency alarms were clearly audible in the recordings, along with the sounds of workers responding to evacuation orders and equipment shutting down automatically. But during the supposed emergency, the actual drill floor was operating normally. Clear skies, routine drilling operations, no equipment failures or safety concerns. Workers reported a quiet, uneventful shift with no unusual incidents. When I researched the specific emergency procedures described in the Phantom recording, they matched exactly, down to individual radio call codes and response timing, with an actual drilling emergency that had occurred on a different platform back in '93. Oil platform Gulf Titan had experienced a blowout preventer failure that killed 8 workers and destroyed the platform. The Phantom operators were apparently recreating that disaster in precise detail, almost 25 years after the original tragedy. This pattern appeared throughout the Phantom recordings. Conversations about storms that had struck different platforms, equipment failures that had occurred on other rigs, emergencies that had claimed lives throughout the Gulf's drilling history. Each Phantom discussion recreated actual events with perfect accuracy, as if the communication system was somehow accessing historical records of disasters that had occurred elsewhere. Blackout periods grew longer, sometimes lasting hours, while entire sections of the platform fell into communication silence. Workers began reporting increasing anxiety about the communication failures, especially during night shifts when the blackouts were most frequent and extensive. Several crew members claimed that they could hear phantom conversations leading through powered off radios in their living quarters, faint echoes discussing work assignments, safety procedures, and routine operations that seemed to originate from the radio speakers, even when the equipment was switched off and disconnected from power sources. The worst incident involved Carlos, who was a young electrician from Louisiana. He had joined our crew only 3 months earlier. Carlos was working alone in the North Wing electrical room during a communication blackout when he heard his own voice coming through the radio system. He ran to the communications room in a state of panic, insisting that he had heard himself coordinating emergency electrical repairs during a platform fire. When I reviewed the recordings, Carlos wasn't exaggerating. His voice was clearly audible, calmly reporting electrical systems and their status during what appeared to be a major emergency evacuation. Main power distribution compromised, switching to emergency generators, all non-essential electrical systems offline. Repeat, emergency power only until fire suppression systems can restore normal operations. The recorded emergency lasted for over an hour, with Carlos's voice providing regular updates on electrical system status, coordinating with Phantom supervisors, and following emergency procedures that he had never been trained to perform. But Carlos had been off duty during the entire blackout period, trying to sleep in his quarters on a different deck, with no involvement in any electrical work. What made matters worse was the fact that the emergency procedures described in the recording matched an actual fire that had occurred on the Gulf Pioneer back in 1998, killing 4 electricians, including the man whose job description exactly matched Carlos's current position. The phantom recording suggested that Carlos was somehow filling the role of the dead electrician, completing the emergency response that had failed 30 years earlier. Platform management's response to the communication anomalies was simple corporate nonsense. They blamed it on the equipment, they blamed it on electromagnetic interference, and they blamed it on stress. They'll do anything to save their own skin and their wallets. It's mind-boggling sometimes. Still though, the blackouts continued escalating, and the phantom recordings became increasingly detailed and disturbing. Conversations about disasters that had claimed the lives of hundreds of people throughout the Gulf's drilling history, emergency responses to accidents that had destroyed entire platforms, evacuation procedures for catastrophes that had become legendary within the industry. I reached my breaking point during a severe winter storm in February. Sustained winds over 60 knots and 20-foot seas had forced Gulf Horizon into emergency weathering mode, with all non-essential operations suspended and the crew preparing for potentially dangerous conditions. I was maintaining emergency communications watch in the radio room when lightning struck our satellite communication array, causing a cascading power failure that blacked out half the platform. Emergency generators activated immediately, but the primary communication systems remained offline for almost an hour. The worst part of it all was that the digital recording equipment continued operating on battery backup power, and what it captured during the blackout defied every rational explanation. The recorders filled with phantom communication traffic from dozens of voices, coordinating what just happened to be a massive emergency evacuation. Not just Hall and Denton this time, but entire crews of phantom operators managing a full-scale platform disaster. There were Guys shouting evacuation orders. The sirens were wailing. The metallic sounds of equipment failing and structures collapsing. Radio traffic that suggested the platform was breaking apart in the storm, with crews abandoning their posts and launching lifeboats in desperate attempts to survive. Through the chaos of the phantom emergency traffic, we heard Captain Morrison's voice, our actual captain, who was standing in the radio room with us, calmly broadcasting a Mayday transmission. Mayday, Mayday, this is Gulf Horizon. Platform compromised by storm damage. Structural integrity failing. All hands abandoning platform. Repeat, all hands lost. Platform breaking up. Captain Morrison stood frozen beside the radio equipment, listening to his own voice declare the deaths of everyone on board the platform. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. His own voice was broadcasting our destruction to the Coast Guard's rescue operations that only existed in the phantom recording. This phantom emergency continued for 3 hours, with detailed communications covering every aspect of platform abandonment, rescue coordination, and casualty reporting. Voices of our actual crew members appeared throughout the recording, calmly reporting their own deaths and coordinating evacuation procedures they had never been trained to perform. When platform power was restored and normal communications resumed, the storm was passing, and Gulf Horizon had weathered the conditions without significant damage. No evacuations, no casualties, no structural problems. The platform had ridden out the storm exactly as designed, with experienced crews maintaining safe operations throughout the emergency. But the digital recordings told a different story. 3 hours of detailed documentation showing the complete destruction of our platform and the deaths of everyone aboard, broadcast in the voices of the actual victims who were still alive and unharmed. The final entry in the phantom recording was a single voice, unidentified but familiar, whispering through the static, "Shift complete, logging off." I submitted my resignation the following week and took a position with another company out in East Texas. Rita had already gone to another platform. The company said that the reason why was because she was taken there for advanced training opportunities. But I knew the truth. She was asking too many questions about phenomena that corporate management preferred to ignore, and still continue to ignore, I would wager. The official incident reports attributed the communication anomalies to severe weather interference and temporary equipment malfunctions. Gulf Horizon continued normal operations with a new communications staff who were briefed on standard operating procedures, with no mention of phantom operators or impossible recordings. But through contacts still working on the Gulf platforms, I continue hearing reports of similar communication blackouts throughout the region. Entire sections of rigs going silent while digital recorders capture conversations between operators who died in accidents decades earlier, recreating the disasters that claimed their lives and the platforms they were trying to save. I still work in communications, but only onshore, where radio systems connect to land-based towers rather than satellite networks that span the Gulf's disaster-prone waters. Sometimes when I'm monitoring routine traffic or testing emergency procedures, I think about those phantom voices and wonder if they represent the persistence of professional dedication beyond death. The Gulf continues supplying dozens of active drilling platforms, each independent on communication systems that connect isolated crews to the wider world. But some of those systems may also be connecting current operations to those who have died, to those who still regret, and to those who lost their lives just trying to make it through another day. So please, hear me well. I am not a phantom operator. I am not someone who has ever once believed in the supernatural until just now. But I can't ignore the evidence I've seen. These phantom communications continue to persist to this day. Whether you want to call that dedication to work, or even worse, not even realizing that you're dead. I know one thing for sure. I'm never going back to the Gulf again. And for those who are still out there, please, the last thing you want is to become one of the voices on the radio, still unsure whether you're just doing another day on your job, or if your entire afterlife is bound to the place that claimed your life. If you're enjoying this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get all of our latest videos. And if you have stories that you want to share with us, please send them to me, Ulrich Mossberg, at thedreadjournal@gmail.com. I've seen a lot of things in my time as a pilot. I've seen people jump for joy when they see their loved ones. I've seen people who would beg me to take them as far away as possible, running away from something or someone else. And as crazy as a lot of the stories I have are, nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I saw in the Gulf of Mexico. My name is Jake, and I've been flying offshore helicopters for over 14 years. During that time, I've transported thousands of workers, delivered millions of pounds of cargo, and conducted emergency evacuations that saved lives when platforms faced fires, storms, and equipment failures that could kill entire crews in minutes. But nothing in my flight training prepared me for the platforms that exist only when you need them most, and vanish the moment you look away. Offshore oil rigs absolutely rely on helicopters. We bring fresh crews in, fly exhausted workers out, and we serve as a critical link between isolated platforms and the mainland. Every flight is meticulously logged, every landing detail has to be charted, every helipad inspection documented for safety and regulatory compliance. In an industry where a single mistake can claim dozens of lives, aviation operations follow protocols that are sometimes more rigid than military standards. But what happens when experienced pilots report routine landings on rigs that just don't exist? Platforms that appear on no navigation charts, no company records, no satellite images, yet somehow accept legitimate cargo deliveries and provide signed manifests that satisfy corporate accounting systems. And honestly, not much else. I have to say this. I have to tell this story. I don't know if I'll be able to live with myself unless this gets out. So I have to thank whoever's reading this, whoever this got sent to. Truly. At least now I know, even if one other person knows what I know, I won't be alone anymore. So I worked for Gulf Coast Aviation Services, a helicopter charter that was based in Louisiana. We handled crew transport and cargo delivery for dozens of offshore platforms throughout the region. Our fleet had 12 helicopters ranging from small passenger aircraft to heavy lift cargo machines capable of transporting multi-ton equipment to remote drilling sites. My aircraft was a Sikorsky S-76, configured for mixed passenger and cargo operations, with a range of 400 nautical miles and the capability to operate in weather conditions that grounded smaller helicopters. I typically flew two routes: crew changes every 14 days, transporting workers between onshore bases and their assigned platforms, and emergency supply runs when platforms needed critical equipment or medical evacuations. Flight operations were governed by strict FAA regulations and company policies that required detailed documentation of every aspect of our operations. We had our flight plans filed with air traffic control, weather briefings updated hourly, cargo manifests cross-checked against platform requisitions, and post-flight reports documenting any deviation from standard procedures. My supervisor was Captain Linda. She was a former Coast Guard pilot who'd spent 20 years flying search and rescue missions throughout the Gulf. Linda managed aviation operations with the kind of precision that comes from understanding how quickly offshore conditions can turn deadly for aircrew and for platform personnel. Every flight over the Gulf carries life and death responsibility, Linda told the new pilots during their orientation briefings. You're not just transporting passengers or cargo. You're maintaining the lifeline that keeps isolated workers connected to safety, medical care, and their families on shore. She was always good at grilling us. That just goes to show how much she really cared. The helicopter routes were carefully planned to optimize fuel consumption, minimize weather exposure, and maintain communication with air traffic control throughout each flight. Standard operating procedures required pilots to verify platform coordinates before departure, confirm landing clearance with the rig supervisors, and file detailed reports documented cargo deliveries and passenger transfers. It was during a routine supply run in March 2019 that I first encountered the event that would change my understanding of everything. The flight was scheduled as a standard cargo delivery to platform Echo 12, positioned approximately 85 miles southeast of Morgan City. The cargo manifest included routine supplies, replacement parts for drilling equipment, medical supplies for the platform's dispensary, and food service items requested by the galley staff. Weather conditions were optimal: clear skies, light winds, excellent visibility extending beyond the horizon. I filed my flight plan at 0800 hours, completed the pre-flight inspection, loaded cargo according to the weight and balance requirements, and departed Lafayette Regional Airport with an estimated time of 45 minutes to the target coordinates. Navigation was handled by GPS systems that were cross-referenced with marine charts and compass headings, things that had been standard for decades. Should have been normal. I really hope it was going to be normal too. The flight proceeded normally until I reached the general area specified in the navigation data. GPS indicated I was at the correct coordinates, but my visual scanning revealed only empty ocean extending to the horizon. I must have circled the area for 10 minutes, double-checking navigation instruments and radio frequencies. I assumed I had misread the coordinates or confused the platform identification codes. Then, through the haze that perpetually hung over the Gulf's waters, Steel structures began emerging like a mirage, resolving into solid reality. First, the top of the derrick, then the outline of the living quarters, and then finally the rig itself. This is where my navigation systems indicated that platform Echo 12 was located. But something was wrong with the visual appearance. The platform looked older than the modern structure described in my flight briefing. Weathered steel, faded paint, and a design that seemed to be at least 50 years old. The helipad markings were correct. The landing approach was clear, and the workers were visible on the dock in their coveralls and getting ready to receive cargo. I established radio contact with the platform using standard frequency protocols. Echo 12, this is Gulf Coast Aviation 47 requesting landing clearance for cargo delivery. The response came immediately, clear and professional. Gulf Coast 47, you are cleared for landing. Helipad secure. Cargo crew standing by. The landing proceeded normally. I touched down smoothly on the helipad, maintained rotor RPM for quick departure, and supervised cargo offloading by workers who moved with practiced efficiency. The platform crew was professional, but seemed to keep to themselves. They handled the supplies without most casual conversation that I was used to from offshore workers. When the cargo transfer was complete, a figure in overalls appeared with the delivery manifest. The signature was scrawled quickly but legibly. His name was Harrison, the platform manager. He stamped the manifest with an official company seal before going back into the platform and didn't exchange a single pleasantry with me. The return flight to Lafayette was routine, and I filed the standard post-flight report documenting successful cargo delivery to the platform Echo 12. But when I submitted the signed manifest to our dispatch office, the response was immediate and confused. Jake, there's a problem with your delivery report, Linda told me during the post-flight briefing. Platform Echo 12 is currently positioned 80 miles northeast of your reported coordinates. You delivered cargo to coordinates that show empty ocean on all official charts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I tried explaining that I showed the manifest that was signed by Harrison and that I had landed on a platform exactly where the GPS indicated where it should have been. Linda pulled up the satellite imagery and marine charts that confirmed her statement. Apparently, I had flown away past where I was supposed to go, but I was there, and there was nothing else I could do except insist that I had done my job as instructed. Well, maybe you landed on the wrong platform, Linda said. It's an easy mistake to make when you're tired or dealing with poor visibility. But I had confirmed the platform identification through radio contact, landed on a helipad with the correct markings, and received a properly signed manifest from a platform manager who identified himself as working for Echo 12. The delivery had proceeded exactly according to standard protocols, yet official records indicated I had somehow delivered cargo to empty ocean. Over the next few months, similar reports began filtering through the Gulf aviation community. Other pilots described routine landings on platforms that weren't listed in their flight plans, cargo deliveries to rigs that didn't appear on navigation charts, and encounters with platform crews who accepted supplies but couldn't be verified through company records. Captain Mike, who flew for Offshore Transport Solutions, described landing on what appeared to be a modern drilling platform that matched his navigation coordinates perfectly. Everything looked normal, Mike told a group of pilots during our monthly safety meeting. Good weather, clear approach, professional crew. They offloaded my cargo efficiently and signed the manifest properly. But when I got back to base, dispatch insisted that there was no platform at these coordinates. Should have caught on by then. But I guess I didn't have enough evidence. Either that or I didn't want to believe it. But it started to compound. Similar stories emerged from pilots throughout the region. Captain Susan reported delivering emergency medical supplies to a platform that had requested an immediate helicopter transport for an injured worker, only to learn that no platform existed and no medical emergency was reported. Captain Bob described multiple encounters with what he called ghost rigs that appeared solid during landing, but couldn't be located when he attempted to return with follow-up deliveries. So, during one of our safety meetings, we began to cross-reference the platforms that we visited with historical maritime records. And what we found out shocked us. Every single platform that we had visited was a platform that had already existed in the past. There was a very shocking detail between them. There was a murder on every single one of them, and they all looked like accidents. The only reason why we were able to ascertain that they were murders was because there was a name that had been consistent throughout all of them. Harrison. The supervisor. The rig manager. He was on every single platform that we delivered these materials to. And he was the one who was convicted of murder on every single one of these platforms. The correlation was impossible to ignore. We kept landing on it, accepting cargo deliveries for Harrison. And now we had no idea what to do. We know that Harrison was arrested and eventually faced a death row for his crimes, executed sometime back in '95, but where are we seeing him now? We had to put something to the test. So we convinced company management to authorize an experimental flight with enhanced documentation equipment. Captain Torres volunteered to equip one of our helicopters with multiple cameras, GPS tracking devices, and digital recording equipment that would capture every aspect of a delivery to one of these platforms where we would find Harrison. The test flight was scheduled as a routine cargo delivery, but the pilot that carried the equipment would also document the encounter in every detail. They would have body cameras, cockpit recording systems, and external cameras that could capture the platform structure from multiple angles during approach and during landing. The recorded footage was both compelling and impossible to explain rationally. The video showed the pilot flying over empty ocean according to navigation instruments, then approaching what appeared to be a fully operational offshore drilling platform that materialized through atmospheric haze as he drew near. The helipad looked solid and properly maintained. The landing approach was smooth and professional. Workers in coveralls approached the helicopter and began offloading cargo with practiced efficiency, though their faces always seemed to remain obscured behind smeared safety visors that reflected sunlight and made identifying them impossible. The platform manager who signed the cargo manifest appeared normal in the recorded footage, though the camera had somehow failed to capture clear images of his face or identification badges. The signature was completed with the standard procedures, stamped with what appeared to be legitimate company seals, and documented according to established protocols. The worst part of it, though, was when Harrison stared directly at one of the cameras. He was different somehow. His eyes were glazed over. His face was more unkempt than I'd ever seen anyone else. And I don't know if the pilot remembers, or maybe he knows too well. He didn't speak. Harrison just did not speak. So this left us with a subsequent investigation of each cargo delivery that Harrison wanted. We checked every company record. We checked everything in the inventories. We checked everything that was offloaded. But all we could find was our supplies were missing. Every time we went there, it was like Harrison was stealing our supplies. But he wasn't doing it in a way that seemed obvious to management. Obviously, corporate wasn't doing anything about it. They just wanted to keep it all under wraps. The last thing they wanted was for their company to be associated with a man like Harrison again. The most serious incident with this occurred during a severe storm in November, when Captain Rodriguez radioed that he was running low on fuel and needed to make an emergency landing. Dispatch guided him towards the nearest platform according to official charts, but weather conditions and low visibility made navigation extremely challenging. Captain Rodriguez never reached the designated platform. Instead, his helicopter disappeared from radar contact for over 3 hours, while search and rescue operations combed the area where his last transmission was received. The Coast Guard scrambled. They knew for a fact that Captain Rodriguez was an important asset to the company that we worked for, and the last thing they wanted was to not find him. I kept thinking, was this Harrison's doing? It might have been. Who knows what that ghost was doing? Here I am calling him a ghost. What's wrong with me? Do I really believe in the paranormal? Guess I don't have a choice but to at this point. And that's what made what happened next even more confusing. Rodriguez's aircraft reappeared on radar as he was approaching Lafayette International Airport. He landed safely, but he was clearly shaken by whatever he had experienced during the missing hours. He was gone for about 3, and his flight recorder showed data that he had indicated at a platform 60 miles off his intended course, coordinates that matched the location where Gulf Titan had collapsed during Hurricane Carmen back in '74. When we questioned Rodriguez about what happened, he initially refused to provide details beyond the basic flight report required by FAA regulations. But during a private conversation weeks later, he told me what really happened. I was running on fumes when I saw lights through the storm, he told me quietly. Platform appeared solid. Helipad clearly marked. Crew waving me in for landing. Everything looked normal except for the weather. They were operating in storm conditions that should have forced evacuation hours earlier. The phantom platform that he landed on provided fuel, allowing him to get his helicopter and return safely to shore. But the fuel delivery records showed signatures from ground crew members who were victims of Harrison back when the original platform collapsed 50 years earlier after his death. The aviation fuel had somehow been legitimate. Chemical analysis confirmed it met all specifications. Yet, it had been provided by personnel who couldn't possibly exist. They acted like they were waiting for me, Rodriguez explained, smiling, waving, moving with purpose like they had important work to complete. Professional, competent, but something was wrong with their timing, like they were still operating on schedules from decades ago. And I also didn't see their supervisor. Harrison was nowhere to be found, and that was the first time I had ever seen such a jovial oil platform crew. It was mind boggling and honestly unnerving. After Rodriguez's experience, company management quietly began discouraging pilots from discussing these phantom platform encounters, and the name of Harrison especially was taboo. Official policy declared such reports as navigation errors caused by stress and adverse weather conditions. There was a whole bunch of other corporate jargon that they were using to try and hide these things, but that's all they were doing. They were just trying to hide everything, just like they tried to hide Harrison and his case. I then looked around and I talked to someone else, someone who had worked with Harrison in the past. He asked me not to share his name, and so I won't. But he does remember being the one who finally caught Harrison after surviving an attempt with him. It's strange. I had met Harrison in person. He seemed standoffish and professional, but aside from that, he was more or less what I would expect a supervisor to be on an oil rig. And here I was talking with somebody who knew him from 50 years ago. And all I could do was think to myself, why? Why were we seeing him? Why did he commit murder? Naturally, I told him about the platforms. I told him about Captain Rodriguez's story. And all he said to me in response was, there are some people who will never be satisfied, not even with their deaths. It's best to leave. I took his advice, and so I left. I left Gulf Coast Aviation Services 2 weeks after that, after I put in my notice. And then I became a pilot with a commercial airline that operated exclusively over land. The pay was lower and the work was less challenging, but I couldn't continue flying missions where navigation instruments might guide me to platforms that existed, spaces between reality and maritime memory. Especially not with the spirit of a murderer potentially lurking on one of them. The rest of us were all quietly transferred. Captain Rodriguez stopped flying offshore entirely, and everyone else who had seen or heard about these oil platforms that disappeared and that were run by a convicted murderer were either silenced by being bought off, or they were just simply phased out of the company with their testimonies disregarded. But what really gets to me is Captain Rodriguez's story. The smiles of the workers. Why were they so happy? Why did they look as though everything was fine? Why were they so helpful when they had been so reserved before? I don't like speculating, but the only thing I can think of is that The oil rigs, the phantom ones at least, they're not places where Harrison has any real power. I think they're his prison. And the ghosts of those who died are the ones that are keeping him imprisoned. It's not something I like to think about, but I couldn't do that. I couldn't continue to work out in such horrifying conditions anymore. I'd have enough nightmares, especially after seeing Harrison's face, and they'll haunt me for the rest of my days. These cargo deliveries that we made, we never got the equipment back. We never got the supplies back. But what matters is that I escaped with my life. I just hope that every single other pilot out in the Gulf comes across these platforms is as lucky as I was.